Welcome to Profiles. I'm Charley Walters. I think all of us, have, one time or another, have probably wondered what it would be like to travel around the world. Some of us have traveled around the world. My guest today, Kit Noble, has traveled around the world, and he was paid to do it. I'm happy to have you here. I'm happy to hear about this trip, too.
Thank you.
Tell us, how did this come to be, first of all?
Two Decembers ago, I got a phone call from an old family friend, and she called to tell me that her and her husband had decided to take their 12 and 14-year-old kids out of private school to travel the world. And I thought, well, it's, I hadn't heard from her in a while. It was I just thought, oh, that's really great. Glad you're telling me about it. And then she, towards the end of the conversation, she's like, we want you to come with us. And I didn't even understand what that meant. I go, what do you mean? Like, you need someone to carry your bags? Like, what do you? And she said, we want to document the whole thing. We want to film it. We want still photography, and you're our first ask on someone to bring along with us. And they actually, I did say I had to think about it, which was, in retrospect, was ridiculous. It should have been a no-brainer, but I did have certain commitments here on Nantucket that I had to consider and think about. So I think 36 hours later, I called her back and I said, let's do it. And I didn't even know what that meant. I just knew we were going to a bunch of countries, and we were going to take the better part of a year to do that.
So where did you start, and exactly when did you start?
We actually started in the U.S. We went out west to some areas that they hadn't been to. It's some of my favorite spots in the United States, the Utah, Arizona, Four Corners. And we did a bunch of adventure stuff out there. We went whitewater rafting, we did some mountaineering. They took a survival course. What else did we do out there?
Now, on your website, you've got pictures at White Sands in New Mexico.
Yeah,
Was that a
different trip, but
same area.
Yeah. But one of my favorite areas to travel to in the U.S. Just love it out there. And I was excited that they hadn't been out there, and that we got to do that. That became part of our year of travel. We started in the U.S.
I'm curious where in Utah you were, because I've spent time out there myself under different circumstances.
Moab.
Yes. Oh, yes.
We spent a lot. That was where most of the adventure took place. But that's where we started the whitewater rafting. That's where we did our canyoneering.
That's a wonderful spot.
Yeah, lots of great adventure there.
So from the Four Corners to...
Then we flew out. Did we fly? We may have flown back to New York. I can't remember all the logistics. I did keep a journal, but I'll have to go back for those details. But our first trip outside of the U.S., we flew to Moorea, which is off Tahiti. It's French Polynesian island called Moorea, and that was probably, if you were going to ask me what the highlights of the trip were, that's one of the highlights. We swam with whales off Moorea. It was a 6-day trip on a boat where they take you out each morning, and you basically chase whales, find them, chase them, and then once you find them, you sneak into the water without scaring them with a mask and snorkel, and a large camera housing. I'm laughing because it was the first time I'd used that particular camera and that particular water housing, and I'm photographing whales and a family, and that would have been tough on any other day without learning the equipment at the same time. But I had 6 days to figure it out. But that was just truly amazing.
Obviously, that's dangerous to some degree, but how dangerous was it?
It really isn't. I mean, they've got it figured out. There's a whale whisperer, the guy the captain of the boat has been doing it for years, and he explains before you get in the water, not to make too much noise, don't freak out and splash, but also you have to stay to the left or the right side of the whale, because that's where their eyes are. As long as they can see you, it's totally fine. If you try to chase them from behind or come up in front of them, all they're going to do is swim away from you, but it'll startle you, it'll startle them.
What kind of whale was this?
Humpback whales.
And they're about how big, would you say?
School bus size. And they go to Moorea to birth. So you're seeing the mother, but also you're usually seeing a baby along with it. And that's really interesting that they're not more protective. I mean, they are protective, but like to be in the water with a baby, you know, a calf, a small whale, and not have the mom freaking out about it, it's pretty interesting. I think they're probably used to having swimmers around. I mean, they're fairly close to the island at that point.
Back in the 70s, somebody put out a record album called Songs of the Humpback Whale, which was just... Now, did you hear that sound?
That's how we found it.
And you recorded
when
that.
When I call the captain the whale whisperer, he was the whale whisperer. He would drop a microphone in the water, and he'd be like, they're 3/4 of a mile to the north, or whatever. And he'd speed the boat up there, he'd drop the mic in again, he'd go, oh, they're 200 yards off to our left, and he'd speed. All I'm hearing is this beautiful noise, but he could tell which direction they were and how far they were by the sounds we were hearing. And then he'd go in the water first, find them, because they'd usually be, you get to see them when they come up and surface, but that only lasts maybe a minute. And then the rest of the time, they're quite I don't even know, 30 meters down. And he's a free diver, the captain, so he goes all the way down and finds them and figures out what direction they're headed and where they're going to be, and then positions us in the water. It's fascinating.
Now, you did video. Did you do audio as well of the sounds?
I recorded on the boat. I recorded it because we had when they dropped the mic in, there's a speaker on the boat. I back up there. So I recorded it there, but you could the camera housing actually penetrated the whale sounds actually penetrated the camera housing, so you could hear it in the video as well.
Huh. So you left Tahiti, and actually, let me ask you this first. Who decided where you were going to go? Was that all the family, or did you have input into this?
They asked me if I had a bucket list. That was really cool. That was a part of that first phone call. I'm like, why do you care where I want to go? So I threw out places I hadn't been that I wanted to go to, and I think we did 11 countries, and I think 7 of them I had not been to. And I've done a fair amount of travel.
So let's go back to Tahiti. From Tahiti, you went to
New Zealand.
In the neighborhood.
Yeah, it's in the right direction.
Sort of.
You don't want to come back from Tahiti to the U.S. and then go back to New
wouldn't.
Zealand. So we were, I don't know if it's quite halfway there, but then it was New Zealand, we did North and South Island, and then from there went to Australia.
How important was it to be in New Zealand, for your purposes, to be there at a certain time of the year? I mean, that part of the world, the seasons are reversed. Did you factor all that into where you went and when you went there?
To some extent. Sarah, the mom, planned all of the trip based on all of our input, and she looked, she kind of figured out, is that a good time to be there? But New Zealand's crazy. It reminded me a little of Iceland in terms of the weather, because it's spectacular, 75-degree day, and then the next day it's snowing. And it's not even a matter of elevation, like driving up to the mountains and it's snowing. On the same road, 8 hours later, suddenly the temperature has dropped and it's snowing. It's crazy. So I think we did factor in time of year, and I think it was right on the change of seasons, which is why we got both those conditions.
Now, was this all mapped out before you went, or did you?
No, I thought it would be. I didn't ask a lot of questions. I took care of packing my gear. And a lot of times we worked about 3 to 4 weeks out. So while we were in New Zealand, Vietnam was being planned, which was after Australia. And it was all Airbnbs.
And how did those work out?
Great. It's pretty interesting that wherever you go in the world, there's an Airbnb. Sometimes it was tight quarters. I think we just decided that hotels would be too predictable, and we wanted to, try to get a little bit more of an experience with the communities. So we wanted to kind of stay. I think if you go to hotels, sometimes you tend to gravitate to the hotel during your downtime, and you don't really see as much. Whereas if you're in Airbnb, maybe you go explore this. I don't know. Maybe you go explore the city more or venture out more than you normally would.
Well, if you're in a hotel, especially a chain hotel, you don't know what country you're in, never mind what city you're in. Once you get in the door, are you in New York, or are you in Sydney, or are you in,
Yeah, like in New Zealand, we were staying with a New Zealand family. I mean, it was a big house. We had, a separate wing, basically, but we, interacted with them. It was, made it a lot more interesting.
How big is this family?
4. So it's two kids, 12 and 14, and mom and dad. And another interesting thing was the father, Ray, he couldn't take a year off from work. So he works in New York, in New York City in finance. So he probably did 7 weeks total. Very cleverly and creatively worked his way out of the office. Oh, I've got to go to the London office, and then he would stop in Australia. And
So most of the time he wasn't there.
yeah, which made the dynamic really interesting, because as a foursome, we look like the family, right? I was dad, and a lot of times I was mistaken for the father, and it depended on who we were interacting with. Sometimes we just laugh about it. The kids would get a kick out of it. I mean, fortunately, we've all known each other for a long time, so we're very comfortable with that. And if it was someone we were going to be spending a fair amount of time with, we would explain. Like if it was a guide or something for a 5-day trip, we'd say, "Oh, he's just the photographer." So.
Now you knew each other beforehand, and obviously you got along. But what was it like to be
That's
everybody
my
together,
story, and that's my
24
my
hours
book.
a day,
I mean,
month after month, no matter how great a time you're
it's-
having? It must have been a strain at some point.
It was intense, and they're a great family. They really are. But I mean, 24/7, 12 and 14-year-old kids. And everyone's got their moods, and whatever. It was and there'd be times we were in a car for 10 hours, so literally trapped, and like I said, it was intense.
So New Zealand to Australia, I assume? Was that the next
Yes,
stop?
yeah.
Okay, and then from there,
The highlight there was we dove the Great Barrier Reef. So that was another thing that we all did before we left the U.S. in addition to the survival training, which we really didn't need, but it was kind of a fun thing to do. We also all got certified in scuba, which allowed us to go to the Great Barrier Reef.
you hadn't done that before,
I dove before, but
not certified.
no. It was back up. Yeah. So I was certified before the family was. So I've
Okay.
done a couple of dives outside of the U.S., but I hadn't done an extensive trip like Great Barrier Reef, where you dive 4 dives a day for 6 days.
Huh. What kind of shape is that reef in? One reads a lot about.
You're on the boat, you're with the captain and the guides, and you ask them because they've seen it over the course of time, and everyone says it's coming back. From what I don't know how bad it got. A lot of different reports. There was a lot of sea life. I mean, they also handpick where you dive, right? So there may have been some dead zones that the boat didn't stop at, but everywhere we dove was spectacular. It looked like they were very healthy.
Obviously, to get from Tahiti to New Zealand, you'd be flying, and presumably the same to Australia. But in Australia, for example, did you fly into one destination and then drive a long ways to get to another one?
In Australia, we flew to all our destinations, but New Zealand, we drove the North Island to South Island. Once we landed, we were in a car the whole time. So it was a mix of car travel versus air travel. And then when I say we're on a boat, we weren't sailing from continent to continent. We were sailing around one area for a particular reason, for a particular adventure.
So after Australia, was it Vietnam, or was there something in between?
I'm going to go with yes. I'm pretty sure that was our next stop. It was a little, like I said, I think we did 11 countries, and yes, Vietnam.
If it's Wednesday, it must be Vietnam, that sort of thing.
Oh, it was definitely. We did about 2 weeks in each country. It would have been great to do 3. Like it seemed like a lot of time, and then at the end of the second week, it was like, wow, why can't we stay longer? We were already on the move. But it did you wake up and go, okay, what country am I in today? We kind of make a joke about it, but.
I'm sure there was not a typical day anytime in this trip, but just give us an example of what a day might have been like.
Well, we had certain requirements, family requirements. So we didn't always stick to it, but the idea was that every morning we would exercise, we would meditate, and we would journal. That was, probably parameters. Well, it was parameters for all of us, so that sort of set the tone for the day. Get up early, and no matter where you were, it's a fun way to see a city or see a country. Is go for a 3 or 4 mile run in the morning, and then find a quiet spot on a rock overlooking the ocean and do your meditation. The journaling, at least for me, I procrastinated, and I would have to play catch up after 2 weeks, and ask the kids where we were on what day. Kind of cheated on my journal a little bit, but so that sort of set, like I said, that sort of set the tone for the days, and then yeah, it really depended where we were. Sometimes we were on in a van or a bus where we had hired guides for 2 or 3 days. So there was a lot of, like New Zealand, for example, we were on a bus a lot, just traveling from point A to point B. But we weren't doing the driving, which was great. It was a little more relaxed.
What if somebody wanted a break? What if somebody said, I just need the afternoon off, or I need the morning to be by myself?
Well, that would probably be me. Sarah, the mom, unfortunately, she tried to work in time for herself as well, but it was, her kid, this was the interesting part when you're asking about the family dynamic, was the kids didn't have their friends with them, right? So normally they'd come home from school. Lucas, the 14-year-old, plays soccer, so he's, out the door right after school, blowing off steam with his friends. And we were, because of the nature of the travel and the trip, we were all together a lot. And they didn't have their...
An awful lot.
An awful lot. But there was definitely downtime that I would take, and it was, that was sort of built in initially. Like, anytime I just said, hey, whatever. I would often do dinner by myself, just for the break. And again, it wasn't because they were so awful. It's just, it's intense, and it was just my time to, enjoy the country, the country we were in or whatever, just, by myself, or have dinner and then go to a bar and, chat with people, doing kind of different things that we might do than what we might do with the family. I would try to do, on my time away from the family.
Let's go back to the route. Why Vietnam, as opposed to any other area nearby? Cambodia, Laos.
That was one of the things on my wish list, and one of the things on their wish list. Part of their homeschooling, we called it world schooling, because they weren't really at home being schooled. They were somewhere in the world being schooled. So the kids did their math online, but their English and their history was kind of combined depending where we were. I'm getting around to Vietnam as an example. So they would study the history of Vietnam a week before we arrived there. So they, and then they would write after we crawled through the tunnels, in Vietnam. But we also watched that 10-part film series on Vietnam. Escape. I think it was called Vietnam. But we watched that prior to getting there. So that became part of their education and part of our education. And then getting to actually see these countries firsthand.
Now, were the children getting academic credit from their respective schools?
Yeah, both of them advanced to the next grade.
Really interesting.
And there was more going on than I'm describing, but I know the math was done online, and the mom just oversaw that, and they had one of the teachers back home was checking in with them via email once a week and making sure the assignments were getting done, math assignments, and then they would email their English papers or their history papers in and get graded, and it was that part of it was kind of cool.
Amazing
how that can happen, and it wasn't I don't think it was a lot of extra work for Sarah. I mean, I'm sure she had as a parent you still have to discipline even if your kid's at home. In fact, there's probably more distractions.
Was that a problem? I mean, 2 young teenagers or about that age. Teenagers tend to be a handful no matter where they are.
Yeah. It was good and bad.
Not to put you on the spot.
I don't have a family of my own, so which makes it even more interesting for me to have to be embedded in a family like that. We quickly learned. We all picked on each other and jokes, and they. But the other thing is, if your iPhone's not working right, you just hand it to them, and it's within seconds. Like their technology. What they know technologically is incredible. So I learned a lot from them that way. But again, just Lucas, the 14-year-old, is a soccer player, so he and I would go kick a soccer ball. We'd find things to do as a family.
How often were you completely out of touch because of geography or broken equipment?
No
or
more
both?
than 3 days at a time. We didn't have Wi-Fi.
Now, where was that?
Milford Sound in New Zealand.
Which is, okay.
So we were on a boat for 3 days there.
Uh-huh.
Maybe that was 2 days. There's a couple, yeah. But I think for the most part, the countries all have the technology, to stay in touch. I would just check out just because I could. I knew there was no clients calling, so I wouldn't check emails for weeks at a time, or check my phone.
Sounds great to me.
Just use my phone for if I couldn't pull my camera out quick enough, I would use my phone for a quick video or a snapshot. That's the only time I really used it.
The people in the countries you visited, did they know what you were doing?
Not
initially.
They just figured we were tourists, and then we would tell them quickly tell them our story. Like, oh, they're like, how long are you traveling for? And we'd be like, oh, a year. And they'd be, what do you mean? They just assumed we were on a vacation for 2 weeks. So people were really, really interested in that aspect. And we had set up an Instagram account for the family, so we picked up some followers, other families that were either traveling the world at the same time, doing the same thing, which is really interesting. Like you don't think about it till you think about it. Suddenly you're being followed by another family that's the bucket list family that's been out there for 3 years doing this.
On the ground, were there Americans everywhere, or was that a factor in picking where you went?
Well, it definitely wasn't a factor.
Or put it another way, were you trying to avoid seeing a lot of Americans as you traveled the world?
To some extent, it was refreshing not to run into other Americans. So maybe it wasn't so much the country we were picking, but it was the activities. I think there's probably certain activities that, I'm generalizing here, but Americans might be attracted to. So we wouldn't do sort of the Disney worlds of, other countries. We'd do things like, swim with whales. And so on that particular trip, we met people from other countries.
How often was language a barrier?
Oftentimes we had a guide, Vietnam, for example, where, probably would have been language barrier. But we had a guide that was translating for us. Trying to think other. We were in Peru. We didn't get to Peru yet, but we were in Peru and had a guide for several days there as well.
Because Americans, to the rest of the world, English is a common second language. But if the second language of the rest of the world is your first language, you may not learn another language.
Right.
So it becomes a problem if you're English speaking but haven't been taught another language.
Right.
After Vietnam?
India.
And why India?
They had been, they as a family had traveled to India before, up north, some of the more religious areas. We were in Rishikesh and Dharamsala, and they had been there before and wanted to visit some of their friends. They'd spent maybe a month there, so they'd established some friendships. So they just figured while they were out traveling the world that they could, go and visit friends and some places that were familiar to them in India.
Were you in Calcutta or Bombay or any of the?
No. Those are actually the two larger cities we were in, Rishikesh and Dharamsala.
I was talking to another guest I had on the show a few months ago, and we were talking about the fact that in about 10 years, India will overtake China as the most populous country on the planet. Did you have a sense of that? Probably not up where you were, because you were up north where it's not so populated, but it's a very densely populated country.
Some of the drives that we did, it was just, definitely a lot of people. It's one of the first things you notice when you get on a road, especially where we were, where there weren't highways. It was just, they were only 1-lane road, but they quickly became 2- and 3-lane roads. They're just, traffic was pretty crazy. And
what about cows?
A lot of cows.
I mean,
in the roadways?
Yes, yeah. I mean, is that, those stories are not exaggerated?
No, not at all. Yeah. And people had told me that as well. I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. And
How close to the Himalayas were you when you were in Dharamsala?
Fairly close. Within 100 miles.
So I guess you couldn't see them, but you were.
Oh, no, not quite. But we were, I want to say 60 to 70.
Now, about
So
what time?
they call them foothills. So in the distance, like
Okay.
at certain times of day, like sunrise, sunset, when the air was really crisp and clear, you could see the foothills to the Himalayas.
Now, what time of the year was this in India, approximately?
December.
So this is still towards the beginning of the trip.
Yeah.
Okay.
Although it felt like we'd been on the road quite like 3 months in. That was,
Well,
and that's right.
travel's exhilarating, but it's tiring at the same time.
Oh, it is. Definitely.
Next stop.
Think so. After India, we actually flew back to the States for a week, just to regroup, switch out gear, clothing. We didn't need any more cold weather stuff, which we needed in New Zealand. So we dumped a bunch of gear. Quickly visited family there, and then we went back out. Stop me here. Where did we go? To Peru? I think we went to Peru at that point.
So it would have been there somewhere in
notes here,
Peru,
too. Yes.
if I'm correct.
Yep.
Okay. And why Peru?
Again, it was my bucket list and their bucket list.
There's a photograph on your website. Maybe there's more than one, but there's one where there's all sorts of equipment. Presumably it's all photographic equipment. How much photographic equipment did you have to do this trip?
Well, that was a lot. I had 5 different camera systems. I have your standard DSLR. We had two cameras and 5 lenses, and then we had a drone, and then we had GoPros, which the kids used.
How many bags and how much weight is all this?
Well, most of it was on my back, and it was heavy. It was a backpack that I carried on the plane with me, and then wherever we could, we'd sneak. The kids weren't looking. We'd sneak gear into their bags as well. So they were carrying the drone, and there's a device called an Osmo, a little steady cam. We had that, and then our iPhones. So it was 5 different pieces of equipment that we're recording on.
And what if something breaks and you're in the middle of Peru?
Didn't happen, thankfully.
Really?
We
Really?
had 2. Well, I mean, we had 5 camera systems, so we would have had it covered.
Okay. So much for
we
Murphy's
had-
Law. I'm
yeah.
amazed that nothing.
I know.
That's
Nothing got
remarkable.
stolen, nothing broke.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, nothing even cracked or We did have 2 camera bodies, so, if one of those had failed, we'd still have our primary camera for filming.
A lot of us can't walk across the room without dropping the iPhone on the floor. So
Right.
this is amazing.
Yeah. And we're in and out of the water and the housing, and it's a lot of gear.
Peru to where?
South Africa.
Uh-huh. The country or the region in general?
South Africa, the country.
The country, okay.
I'm just trying to think if we left. If we passed over a country while we were moving through. Well, we stopped in Singapore for a couple of days. After India, we were also in Abu Dhabi as an overnight as well. But in terms of actually being in a country for two weeks, the next stop was South Africa. That was the last part of our trip. So, if you're somehow we're back in June now, but.
I'm a desert fan, so if I'd stopped in Abu Dhabi, I would have stayed for a while. But you guys didn't.
It was an overnight. We were waiting for another flight, so we overnighted there, and I think we built in an extra day because of that, and just caught the next day's flight. But it was a layover initially. So we did drive out to the desert, but very short. We were out there for 6 hours or something.
South Africa, and
South Africa was our last stop, and we did a safari. We also did a lot of road time. We drove across the Garden Path, the Garden Highway. There's a name for the Southern Highway there, which was just fantastic views. Little like the California coast, I guess, where it's just jagged cliffs and the roadway goes right along the edge of the ocean. Just fantastic.
now, how many times, if at all, did you unexpectedly run into Nantucket people on this trip? Not planned.
I remember the country I left out was Costa Rica. And the reason I bring that up with this question is we were gone probably 10 months at that point. We were there in January and February in Costa Rica. So Costa Rica was the family's kind of go-to vacation spot. So another stop. They wanted to stay out of the country, but they wanted to sort of relax from all the travel. So they're familiar with Costa Rica. So we were in Nisara, and that's when I started running into people from Nantucket.
And that's
they call that Nantucket South.
Yes.
So there was a 3-week period when the school was on break here on Nantucket, where I went to a party one night. There was 30 people from Nantucket, which I honestly would have avoided if I had just left Nantucket, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I hadn't been on Nantucket in 10
Yeah.
months, 11 months, so it was kind of cool to run into people. And
Was that the only place you ran into?
yeah.
Huh. I'm surprised you didn't run into at least one, but.
It's a big world out there.
And where did you end up? Where you started? Did the group of you end up in the same place you started?
Meaning like back in
The 5 of you or the 4 of you, depending on.
Yeah, when we returned from South Africa, we went right back to New York, and the family's out of Connecticut, so that was a home base. Whenever we swung back through New York, we would drive out to Connecticut and overnight there.
So from start to finish, it was
11 months.
11 months.
Yeah, and there was some breaks in there. Again, we came back twice. Once for a week,
Yep.
and then once, I think, for like 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Again, they had some schooling stuff going on that they had to reconnect and be back in Connecticut for.
So all that footage, what are you doing with it?
That remains the big question. They wanted to make sure it was documented and that we had this body of work. Sarah she's begun writing a book about this adventure. So the book might dictate what we do with the footage.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it'll follow the same story. So it could be a documentary film, or it could be a 10-part web series. The idea is that the family wants to say that this is accessible for your children as well. Sure, there's a price tag associated with it. It wasn't astronomical, but it's more about the value of doing this with your kids. Maybe you only do a month and not a whole year. But that's what Sarah and Ray are hoping to put out there with the book, with the film, is to encourage other families to do this with their kids before it's too late.
Obviously,
Too late meaning the kids are too old, not that there's no world anymore.
You've been a photographer and a filmmaker for a very long time, so you've done things like this, not on this scale, but you've done things like this before. Tell us some of the other things you have done.
So I've been at it for 30 years, and I've done a fair amount of travel. Did a cool trip to Alaska many years ago.
That's where you got your hand frozen to the tripod.
Right, It's a long story.
How did you get it off?
I had to bring it inside until it thawed. It didn't last that long, but it hurt like heck. That was just I had loaned my gloves to someone else.
Let no good
and
deed go
to keep my
unpunished.
hands warm, I stuck them in my pants, and my hands actually sweated. So when it was time to go back indoors after the shoot, I grabbed the tripod and literally got burned by.
But no permanent damage.
No.
Good.
Anytime I travel, I obviously bring cameras, and I seek out adventure. So I've done a cool trip to Iceland. We've done some great scuba dives and underwater stuff as well.
Tell us about the shark cage.
Oh, that was here on Nantucket. That was an assignment for Nantucket Magazine, where the Rob Cacuzo and I, the editor, and I went out off the coast of the Nantucket, about 10-20 miles out, and with a shark cage. And there was, I guess I can talk about it now because I don't think the captain is no longer on the island. But apparently the cage had some defects, and I pointed them out before I got in it. I'm like, what is this weird opening here? It's like, oh, that used to be a door, but it fell off. And I go, well, it's not a problem. It's not really a cage anymore if if the door's wide open. Anyway, he said it'd be fine. He goes, why would a shark swim into a cage? And I'm like, well, that's a really good point. If I was a shark, I wouldn't swim it. Anyway, so I got in the cage to photograph the sharks, which he was baiting with chum. I wasn't getting the shot I needed. So I said, could you bring the shark closer to the cage? He brought the shark right up to the cage, and then the shark pushed the food he was trying to get into the cage, and he came into the cage to get it.
How big a shark was this?
A 7 foot. I don't know my sharks very well. Blue shark. 7
foot shark is big enough.
Yeah, I'm 6 foot. He's 7 foot. The cage is not that big, so there was not room for both of us.
So who got out first?
All I had was a mask on, so I saw him coming in, and I grabbed a breath and I ducked, and then I pinned myself to the bottom of the cage while he thrashed around trying to get out the door he'd come in. Again, he wasn't used to being in a cage, so he didn't know where the door was. So I was on a breath for probably close to a minute, and I'm like, well, I need air. I'm coming up, whether the shark wants me there or not. So I just came up to the top of the cage, throwing punches.
So the shark was still in the cage when you got out of it?
When I came up. He quickly found.
Oh, I see. Okay,
so I came up.
Got out
I came up
he
punching. Figured at the very least I'm going to lose a hand. If I punch him in the mouth and whatever. But as I came up, I don't know. It's like I'm punching sharks, but I was thrashing around and I didn't know what else to do. And right at that moment, he found the way out of the cage. Just about the time I was out of air. So.
That'll keep you awake at night.
Interestingly enough, I swam with sharks on this trip with the family.
Really?
With no cage, which is what I would recommend. Just keep the ocean big and open. Don't confine the sharks, and they're fine. They're very curious. They come swim right up to you, but they don't bother you. But it was interesting being back in the water with sharks after that experience.
On a lighter note, at least I think it was a lighter note, you had an encounter with a monkey in Sumatra?
Oh, this is as a child. You've obviously been to my website. Thank you.
I recommend it. It's fascinating.
This was as a kid, but this was at the start of my photography career. I was 13. I was living in Singapore with my family. And we were, out shooting in a zoo no, it wasn't even a zoo because the monkeys were wild. But I was taking pictures of the monkeys, and I put my lens cap down in front of me on the ground, and I was, really close to the monkey, and I saw him reach for something, and I realized he'd just grabbed my lens cap, it was a brand new camera. It was only, it was only a $10 lens cap, but I was like, so I like chasing this monkey around.
But you got it back?
No, never saw it again. I hope he didn't swallow the thing, but.
Two more things before we go. First of all, you and Chip Webster had a movie in the Nantucket Short Films Festival.
Yeah.
Which was fabulous. Tell us about it.
That was Chip's. We started the festival about 5 years ago, and I've made, it's sort of my part as being on our board of directors, or at least on the committee, the shorts committee. I've always feel a responsibility to make sure we have enough films every year, so I always make a film. And last year I made a film about Chip Webster. He's an eclipse chaser, and Chip's an eclipse enthusiast. So I did a film about Chip, got to know him very well, traveled with him to South Carolina for the total eclipse. That was last year, 2017, yeah. And then while we were working on that project, or while I was working on that project and interviewing him, I said we should do a film together, because the guy's just got like this, if you know Chip at all, he's a really interesting guy. A lot of fun ideas. He's like, yeah, I'll come up with I get a couple old scripts. I'll dig them up and we'll shoot a film next year, meaning this year. So he had this script written, I think 5 years ago, called Stork Cab. And you said you saw the film.
I saw it.
I don't want to give away the punchline in case people haven't seen it, but it's a really interesting premise, and it was difficult to film because of that. We had to think in reverse.
Well, there's an awful lot going on in it. I mean,
it's a feature film.
You can't pick it all up in what is it, 8 or 9 minutes, something like that?
It's close to 10.
Okay.
Which is our parameters for the film is 2 to 10 minutes. So it could be easily be a feature film. And
there's a lot more than 10 minutes of
and we had
content going on.
Several times we really had to dumb it down, because when he goes out on a tangent and he's thinking through this process, through the script, we're like, the average person's not going to get that. I wouldn't have gotten it if I wasn't shooting the film. In fact, we'd be shooting and I'd be like, I don't understand what's going on right now. Like, what is the next scene?
Well, a lot of it went by me until afterwards when you and Chip were talking about it, and I thought, oh, I've got to see this again.
That was Chip's whole idea. It's the kind of film you have to, once you sort of figure it out, you go back and there's clues all the way through it, which is kind of fun.
Last thing, which is the first thing of yours I ever saw, and that's a movie about Muskegon. Tell us about that.
Yeah, that was I did a film on the seals out at Muskegon.
10 or 11 minutes long, as I recall.
Yeah. This is kind of controversial film because people were siding with, with the seals or the Seal Abatement Committee. But for me, I just took the approach of what a cool thing to go out and film. So we spent a couple days out of Muskegon, or a couple shoot days anyway. And there was a ton of seals, and it smelled really bad. But it felt a little like a Nat Geo assignment. I mean, you were like right in the thick of it, laying on the beach with, seal poop and, seal babies, and it was cool. It was a lot of fun.
Well, I had Crocker Snow on another show
sure.
At one point, and he was talking about it. But even if seals aren't your thing, it was fascinating to see Muskegon.
Oh, yeah.
Not many people have been to Muskegon, and
True.
And there it is.
Right. I had not been there either.
Yeah,
It's invite only, unless you end up there, accidentally.
by accident, which you probably don't want to do.
Right.
Kid Noble, thanks very much.
Thanks for having me.
This has been fascinating. We could have gone on for
It
hours.
was great reliving the story.
I'll bet it was. And as I said before, go to Kid's website. You will be fascinated. For Profiles, I'm Charley Walters for Nantucket Community Television and Channel 18. Thanks for tuning in.